You are listening to E-Radio Show
by Missed Apex. We are elected.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the E-Radio Show, brought to you by Missed Apex Podcast. Today's episode is called See Ya Chill Later. I'm Matt Trumpets, and we're here today to discuss the latest E-Prix that just happened over the weekend in Santiago, Chile. And joining me is my famous world-traveling journalist companion, Chris No More Score Stevens. How are you doing today, Chris?
Hey, Matt, I was covering the race from home this weekend, and I found that pretty exhausting trying to keep up with everything that was going on. Can you imagine if I'd have been in the 38-degree heat of the Chilean summer?
Well, I must be honest, having seen you this past summer in a Brooklyn July, I do believe you would have simply melted. But before we go any further, can I remind everybody, we are an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed with the kind permission of our better halves, bringing you race reviews, news from the paddock, and tech analysis. We live stream our race reviews, so be sure to subscribe to E-Radio Show on YouTube so you get a notification when we go live so that you can join our live chat room as well. What say we talk about some racing? So I understand there was qualifying and there was controversy. What more could a racing series want than an absolutely controversial qualifying to kick off the weekend?
It's great stuff. I love this qualifying format so much, exactly for the reasons that we saw this weekend. I mean, sending them out in championship order at a race like this just gives you a completely topsy-turvy grid. And you'll find all the guys in Group 1 always complaining about the Group 1 gets the worst conditions. Historically, that's not actually the case, but it was very much here because the track conditions improved so drastically between sessions. And it meant the championship contenders that we've had so far, all the guys at the head of the order, were well down the field. D'Ambrosio, 20th after he made a mistake on his lap. Da Costa, 17th. Verne, 12th on the grid. But it was great for the likes of Stoffel Van Dorn, who made a second top 5 appearance in only his third Formula E race. Lopez and Gunther and Massa and Mortara all having great qualifiers because they went out later in the better track conditions and they get a higher grid spot. And as we've seen, it's difficult at times to make up places in a Formula E race, especially on a track like this one where it was quite hard to overtake. So track position was so key here.
Right. And if I'm understanding you correctly, you sound like a true believer here in this qualifying. Is this something that other series, F1, should consider? Because it seems like a much better solution than, let's say, just reverse grids.
I am a huge believer in it. I think Formula's kind of had this right from the get-go, with the exception of the lottery element of it that they used to have. Remember, they used to draw names out of a hat to see which group they'd go out in. And now they've ditched that and just gone for championship order instead. That was the perfection of the system. John-Eric Verne was not very happy with the format after qualifying, obviously, because he'd actually qualified in 13th or 14th. I think he actually gained a couple of places because of post-qualifying penalties. But he was not very happy with it at all and said that, it's unfair and it gives the lower guys an advantage, but that's the whole point. Do I think F1 should adopt it? Not really. I think this is the kind of thing that Formula E can do and should do. But for me, Formula One is a more pure form of racing. And therefore, they shouldn't do something like that. Because I like this format, don't get me wrong, but I also like Formula One's current qualifying format.
Well, fair enough. It actually, to be honest, really puts me in mind of World Rally Championship, where I believe they send the cars off in championship order, which is usually the first car off, I believe, is at the biggest disadvantage. So it's either championship order or current order for the weekend. Those of you who know more than me about it, feel free to say something in the chat room. And yeah, fair enough. I get it. Formula One's qualifying does kind of work, but yeah, I don't know. It would be fun to see. It would be fun to see them being put under the pressure of the single run to make Super Pole, if nothing else.
Question from the chat room, actually, and you can join the live chat room by subscribing to eRadio on YouTube, asking what we thought about the Santiago track layout, version 2.0, after they moved venues. I really liked it. It was a track of two halves, wasn't it? The first half of that lap was super, super quick, really great to watch in qualifying. Second half, a bit slower. There was a good mix of the technical and the quick in there, some good straights. I like the fact that they had the surface changes in there as well. Matt, I don't know if you had any of your own thoughts on that as well.
Well, I would say I enjoyed watching the race at that circuit. It seemed very fast, and I like the fact that the surface changed. And yeah, in general, it was fun to watch, and it was nice to. I'll tell you what. You know what really struck me when I watched this is it's nice to see a single seater car being able to run that close, to each other, single seater cars. It's so exciting, even if it took lap upon lap upon lap to set up an attempt. Just being that tight increased the odds that something would go, well, slightly awry, for lack of a better word.
The beauty of Formula E aerodynamics, really, isn't it? Paul Wright in the chat room saying he's not such a big fan of it. And I can understand, I can see where some fans are coming from when they say they didn't like the circuit. There was a big likening of the pit straight, which was the concrete section, because it was shaking so much you couldn't just see the driver's head bouncing around in the cockpit, but you could hear the motor being rattled around, and it changing frequency and audibly. You could hear the effect that the bumps were having on it, and it was very much being likened to Sebring, which I believe has not been resurfaced for decades. So I think when you're being compared to Sebring, you're doing something right. But just to finish up on qualifying, of course, the big story out of qualifying was Lucas di Grassi's best pole position, the best lap I've ever done in Formula E by half a second on what was only a sub 70-second lap. It's really, really impressive. And then he gets thrown out of qualifying for what he called the stupidest rule in motorsport. And I'm going to be completely honest with you here. I still don't fully understand it, and I don't think many people do.
Well, before you give us your best guess, it had something to do with their attempt to use the brakes to heat the tires. Am I right about that?
So the rule focuses on the usage of brakes on the in lap. So once you've done your qualifying lap, I was hearing it on the team radio, new in lap procedure, because this was a new rule that was brought in just for this weekend. I believe it was in reaction to Tom Dillman's brake failure that we saw in Marrakesh in qualifying, the one that caused him to go into the back of the two Envision Virgin racing cars in the pit lane after qualifying. I believe, anyway, there's no actual comment on that, but it was pushed through by Spark Racing Technologies, of course, the chassis car supplier to all the teams for Formula E. That was pushed through for this weekend, and it centers around not using your brakes differently to how you did on your actual hot lap. So in other words, and although there's no actual evidence to suggest that this is what di Grassi was doing, but a lot of drivers, you'll find them pumping the brake pedal on the in-lap to try and keep the temperatures up and crucially the tire pressures and temperatures up for when they go through to Superpole, because the car's just going to be sitting there in the meantime. So they tend to pump the brake pedal a little bit more, and I think Spark have looked at it, thought, we don't really like that because that increases the chances of a brake failure, like we saw with Tom Dillman. So we're going to put a stop to that. So you must use your brakes in a similar manner to what you did on your hot lap. That is the best explanation of the exclusion I can come to. But I still do not fully understand it, or how you even begin to measure it.
Well, you're reading my mind with that one, which is like, what are you what are you in real time comparing telemetry from the hot lap with the in lap? And I don't know. Seems crazy. But did you ever have that thing where you were in an argument and then like 10 minutes later you were like, oh, I really should have said that before I stormed off?
All the time.
All the time. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm just realizing what we should have called the show is Them's the Breaks.
Ah, that would have been solid, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're not clever enough to come up with things before we start shows, aren't we? There was a good quote from Lucas, actually, just to wrap up on the break issue, because he really wasn't a big fan of the rule, and I don't think many people are, to be honest. Was that he said on Autosport that the way they measure it seems to be about the usage rather than the actual energy going through the brake pedal. And he said, if you would have looked at the energy going through my brakes, you would have seen it's actually a lot less. So that, in a way, makes me think it's something to do with the number of times you actually press the brake pedal, which isn't the best thing to do, because even if you just dab it ever so slightly, you're barely going to put any energy in them compared to if you properly stamp on them. So I get there are a lot of grey areas and a lot of unknowns about this rule, to be honest, and I don't think this will be the last time we see somebody caught out by it.
Well, if it continues in its present form, let's go ahead and add that. It sounds like there may be some reconsideration, because I don't think he's wrong in terms of measuring the energy going through the pedal versus the amount of times you touch it, because what matters is, essentially how much friction and heat you are generating. So if you're lightly touching the brakes, then you're not generating the same amount of heat as if you're really standing on them from a reasonable speed. Anyway, shall we go on and talk about the race?
My favorite section, where the race was won and lost. And for me, what Sam Bird did was really, really important in the first lap. So he's already gained 2 grid spots from where he qualified. We look back at qualifying, he was going to go top, I think, probably would have bagged a front row start had he not made a couple of mistakes at those final 2 hairpins on his hot lap. That left him P6. But then, with the Degrassi exclusion, and Van Dorn also got excluded from Superpole because he left the pit lane too late, that actually bumped him up to 4th place on the grid. Crucial, because we actually saw Van Dorn had some good pace, and if he'd have got stuck behind him, I don't think he would have made it to the race win, maybe wouldn't have even made it to the podium. So that was crucial. And then he just bumps himself up into the podium placings immediately on lap 1, gets past Daniel Abt into P3, boom, straight away building towards that lead battle. Excellent use of attack mode as well. Just took it early, used it to get past Pascal Wehrlein, and we saw as soon as he was past Wehrlein, he then used it to try and come back at him. But again, the way that Bird attacks and defends, his racecraft is just immense. He constantly proves himself to be a great racer.
Yeah, and I would agree. For me, the way they used attack mode, I mean, first of all, it seems like, especially at the front, suddenly we saw Buemi use it very early on. Bird, Wehrlein, all the top runners were suddenly using it, not only using it early, but using it to attack each other, which is, I think, how they intended for it to be used. And it made the race a lot more fascinating as a result.
Buemi was super, super smart about it. And they worked out how much time he was going to lose activating the attack mode. And then as soon as he pulled that gap, he went and took it and used it to then pull away from Wehrlein. So at that point, not only do you have the benefit of the boost, and so you pull away because of that, but you also know, excuse me, but you also know that he's going to have to take attack mode at some point and lose a second doing that as well. So it's a really good system to kind of take it early. If you're in the lead of a race, it's actually really beneficial if you can pull away. And I don't know about you, Matt, but I didn't quite see this coming from Nissan Edams this weekend.
Well, I completely didn't see it coming, because they were one of the teams that we discussed being slightly concerned about just due to the technical transfer. And suddenly here they are at the front. Granted, Lucas didn't start on pole, but even still, it looked for all the world, and this is where my show title came from, like Buemi was just going to win that race.
It looked like classic Buemi territory, didn't it? You know, season 3 Buemi, where he would just get to the front of the field and Vettel it, basically, and just cruise around and no one can get near him. But this time he came under pressure. And what surprised me about it as well, not just how Nissan was suddenly on pace, you know, after all the software issues that they had in the first few races and throughout testing, and you know they did bring an upgrade here, I think, as well. So they had some updates there that suddenly brought everything together. It seems like certainly in qualifying looked really, really good. And Buemi's, you know, a strong qualifier, so he can always pull a lap out the bag. But what surprised me as well is how much confidence he still had, despite having quite a huge shunt in FP1. That was a result, apparently, of a software issue to do with the braking system, because he locked up and hit the inside barrier, and it was quite a big impact. So that's not only something I think would knock your confidence a little bit, but he lost basically all of FP1, or the vast majority of it anyway. And that's where most of your race running is done. That's where you get your first run at a qualifying lap as well. So for him to still come on and bag P2 on the grid provisionally and then get bumped up to pole position and still have really, really strong race pace, enough that he can just pull away and take attack mode without losing a position, it's a major turnaround. It's suddenly becoming an almost dominant position to be in, which, given where they were in the first 2 races, is a big turnaround and something I just wasn't expecting.
No, I wasn't expecting it either, but I'm not surprised he didn't lose confidence, because if you have a crash like that and you were told that was 100% the car's fault, then you're not really worried. And this is where having 2 people out in FP1 can be really advantageous, because correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't FP1 especially where they work out and tune a lot of the software to make sure that they hit all the technical requirements and stuff like that?
I think you mostly do that in shakedown, but yeah, definitely, because FP1 is the first time you run the car at 200 kilowatts, and it's the first opportunity you get to run it at 250, because at shakedown they're limited to 110, because the whole point of shakedown is to just check the car works. So yeah, in FP1 that is where you do start calibrating all that stuff, and it seems like on the brakes they did get it wrong ever so slightly. But to then go out, first of all, to have that car repaired for FP2 as well was very, very impressive. And then for them to kind of still have the confidence that it's not going to happen again. So we'll go out there, we'll bang a qualifying lap in before the actual session to do a run, and think, if the car crashes again, then we're going to be out of qualifying. So you've got to have the confidence in what you've just rebuilt as well. So I was hugely impressed by what I saw. Unfortunately, it didn't work out in the way that we were expecting. I mean, during that big top 3 battle between Buemi, Bird, and Verline, the issues cropped up again. And this is what Buemi said after the race. The shunt that took him out of the race, first of all, wouldn't have happened if the track wasn't breaking up, I don't think. Worst case scenario, with the normal surface, he would have run a little bit wide, maybe lost the position, probably wouldn't have ended up in the wall. But also he said after the race that it was not a repeat of the software issues that he had in FP1 that led him to that, but somewhat similar, but not the same. So he was saying it wasn't my fault. So I guess that's 2 passes he's been given in one day. But a big shame, really, because I think we could do with seeing Buemi back up the front of Formula E.
Oh, we absolutely could. And it was good to see him there. And like I said, it really looked like he was going to finish first or second in that race. And that's just giving a lot of props to Sam Bird, who's, really got to be like just amazing at the wheel-to-wheel stuff. But I have a question for you about the brakes. Now, you keep on mentioning software. So are we very clear that this is solely an issue with the implementation of brake-by-wire software and has nothing to do with the actual physical brakes themselves, number one? And number two, as sort of part of that, my understanding, or at least part of what the problem I think the drivers are having specifically with regards to overtaking, is that the tires are now generating a lot more marbles, which is reducing the amount of usable surface relative to last year's tires.
I don't think they're making more marble. This race was an extreme one because of the heat, and we're going to get into more detail about that later. To answer your question, yes, I am fully convinced that these are team-specific software issues that we are tending to see, because the systems are so vastly complicated that it's so difficult to get on top of with the 15 days of testing that the manufacturers have had. So this is why I think it's really impressive that teams like Virgin, that have had so much less testing than everyone else, have been able to get on top of it and not only have a double podium in the second race, but also win a race as well now in only the third one. They are hugely complex systems. They're very difficult to get right. And it is just down to software and how you do it, because, of course, the brakes are the same for everyone else. So, in terms of the actual hardware of them, it's all Brembo supplied brakes and put together by Spark. So you can't look at the hardware all that much. You've got to look at what the individual teams are doing. And Nissan were the ones that were, seem to be struggling the most with that.
Okay, fair enough. It was more of a conceptual thing. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the information that you're bringing us here correctly. So, with that, we now have Buemi, through no fault of his own, let us just stress, out of the race. Sam Bird at the front. Where do we go from there? I mean, because I'll tell you what, I was very surprised by Verline's pace, because at the beginning, it totally looked like it was the Bird Buemi show, and that Mahindra was like sort of there or thereabouts, but the gap was developing once Bird put the pass on him, and it wasn't closing up immediately, and then suddenly there they were.
Yeah, I think the reason it toed and froed so much was because of the temperature. So I am going to talk about how this was the hottest Formula E race ever, officially, at 38 degrees, or 37.9 degrees, if I'm being technical about it. I believe that was the actual figure that was provided by the FIA on that one. So the reason there was some toing and froing was because this was going to be the real first test of the extreme for the new McLaren Applied Technologies battery, the standard battery that all the teams receive. We know that this one has a higher threshold for overheating than the old Williams Advanced Engineering battery does. So you get up to 72 degrees, whereas before it was 60, or 65-ish, before it starts overheating, losing performance, and then not long after that, it's going to just give up and shut down completely. I think Virgin were a bit more cautious with it throughout the race, because we saw Verline attacking a little bit more, and then right as he got up to the back of Bird, he was told, hold position, you have to slow down, your battery temperature is critical. So he was getting up to 72 degrees at that point, the magic spot where things are going to start to go wrong. And there are some guys who did hit that unlucky number 72 it was in this week's race. So I think what we saw there was more different strategies for managing the temperature of the battery rather than raw pace. Because the things that we were seeing here as well, the tires were overheating. That meant they were sliding around more. That meant you were using more energy than normal as well. So you have to throw that into the equation as well. So I don't think what we've seen in terms of the ultimate order in this race reflects well how the actual grid shapes up. I think the best race we've had for that so far is Marrakesh. But yet again, there are just so many mitigating circumstances. Well, this team did well because of this, and this team didn't do well because of this issue, and this team didn't get to exploit this potential. And again, in Mexico, there's still going to be another little asterisk there because that's a permanent facility, the only one we go to all season. So we're still not getting a clear indication of what the grid is. But when you look at some of the other results of teams like Dragon and Venturi, especially as well. Um, it does seem like there are going to be some caveats, some oddball results that we saw here. That said, Mahindra has been the one consistent throughout these three races, so I do definitely think that they are a top contender, as are Virgin now, I think.
Okay, so if you're going to mention Mexico and you're not going to mention altitude, I'm going to be savagely disappointed in you, because that's going to very seriously impact the cooling abilities for the batteries.
Exactly. Yeah. Once again, we're going to be coming back to this the cooling issue. It's going to be less about overall temperature, but actually about the ability to cool the battery in that one. But I'm sure we're going to get way more into that as we come to our Mexico City preview. Dan L in the chat room has a question. What happened to DS? They were nowhere all weekend. My explanation for that, again, is to do with qualifying. They were P1 and P2 at the end of Group 1, but end up qualifying 12th and 14th on the grid because of the changing track conditions. Difficult track to overtake on, and the fact that there were some incidents they were involved in, which we are going to get into more detail on in a little bit.
All right, so before we go on to the other things, I have a personal question, which is, we saw our friend from Formula One, Stoffel Van Dorn, doing a very good imitation of someone who's actually quite racy, right up until the point that he drove into a wall. And I wanted to know, and I didn't catch from the race, was that just a mistake that he made, or were there other factors that contributed to his stuffing it up so badly?
No, it was just pure driver error. Got offline, made the corner too tight, too much speed, and just met the wall, which was very unfortunate for him because he was having a absolute corker of a race.
Well, and it has to be encouraging, I think, to HWA as well, that they could run at the front in a race this challenging, at least from a physical constraints point of view, because pretty much we dismiss them as tail end Charlies, as the lantern rouge of the series, and yet here they are running well in the points and looking racy. So cause for optimism?
I think so. I think there is always going to be some potential there. Of course, for them, it's only their third race and they haven't had a proper finish yet. I'll go into more detail about them later, but they still haven't had the proper racy finish to an event yet. So there's still so much for them to learn.
Well, fair enough. Speaking of the end, why don't we get to all the drama, or lack thereof, in the last couple of laps, and tell us how the race turned out for everyone in the chat room still screaming, no spoilers.
So, of course, Bird takes his first win of the season and becomes the first man to win a race in every season of Formula E. I like a good statistic, and he praised the Audi powertrain in the back of that car for, the heat resistance. And of course, this race was always going to be about how your car handles heat and his pace towards the end, because he really pulled a gap while Verline was struggling. Verline P2 in only his second race. That is just sensational. We've seen so many guys come in to Formula E and be brilliant in qualifying and then lose a load of pace in the race because they're not used to energy management. I think this is not only a testament to the fact that Formula E is a little bit more accessible to rookies now because of the easier brake management, but also you've still got to throw on some energy management in there as well. So it is still a skill you have to learn, but also to Verline's ability. I mean, he rarely got to show it in Formula One, did he? Because he never got a decent shot at it. But in every other series he's been in, he's just been fantastic. And I am glad that now in a top series, he's got room to stretch his legs a little bit because he is so fast. And for me, he's my top contender for the second driver to win in his rookie season.
And it makes sense. And it was, I have to admit, it was a bit of a surprise to see him hanging in there so well. But yeah, you do get the sense that we really maybe missed seeing his full potential in Formula One. He was very, very fast and just on it in a way. I mean, it was almost Verne-like, dare I say.
Well, Verne really struggled to get up to speed, didn't he?
Oh,
Um, Felix, for me, is the one who's really come in and done well very, very quickly and matched a teammate, Felix Rosenqvist, that is. And of course, is the only person to have won in his rookie season if you exclude everyone who raced in season one, because obviously they were all rookie winners, so I don't count them. But no, so no one else has done it. And I think Pascal is going to be the top contender for that. I mean, Alexander Sims is obviously the next one on the list because that could have been Marrakesh had the BMW intra-team collision not happened. And he was denied his first podium this weekend, unfortunately. We may as well get into the penalties galore section, which is where I'm going to rant a little bit, unfortunately.
all right, but before you do, was it just me, or was the very last lap of the race not being run at the same pace as all the others?
No, no way. Definitely not. They were losing like up to 10 seconds a lap with the management that they were having to do because it was just so on the limit. And I was getting really, really anxious for Bird as well because he just had that 1% less usable energy than Verline. I thought, oh, he's so on the cusp with this. But the teams are so confident with the energy management now that they can just run it so close to the limit.
Yeah, it was shades of Rossi rolling across the finish line at the Indy 500, or those classic Formula One races of old where people run out of gas right as they're rolling down the start finish straight on the final lap. It's going to be fun to see as things go on when they occasionally might get it the slightest bit wrong. It's going to create some interesting scenarios, I predict. But, I did have one more question if I can delay us a little bit longer. And I can because there's nobody around to tell me to make faces and noises at me. The Envision Virgin is not the only car that has an Audi powertrain in it. How did Daniel Abt do? With his powertrain, do we get a sense that Virgin has managed, kind of like Techeetah did last year, to do better with the powertrain, or do you feel like they were on a par, but he was just not starting as far up the grid?
I think that if Lucas was at the front of the field, he would have been the one fighting for the victory, I feel, anyway. At this point, it's mild speculation, but that's fine because on E-Radio Show and Missed Apex, that's a lot of what we do here. But for me, I would find it unfair to use Daniel Abt as a barometer for where Audi is, and I mean this in the kindest way. But Daniel just isn't as happy with the car as Lucas is at this point. And so therefore he just isn't getting the most out of it compared to Lucas. He wasn't quite on Lucas's pace in Marrakesh. The same was happening here as well. And they just need to tweak the car a little bit to get it to where he wants to be. But to use Daniel in this race to say this is where Audi is, I think that would be unfair because this was looking like the race where Audi were going to put it together after two races of not meeting their potential. And we know what the powertrain is capable of with Virgin. So theoretically, Audi are capable of the same. Lucas was on Virgin's pace roughly. I'd say maybe a little bit below them, but when you consider all the issues he had in practice, that was fair enough. And actually, a good day for them. And they didn't quite get the result they wanted because of other circumstances. This was looking like the one where they hooked it up. They ran incident-free in practice, stonkingly good qualifying lap, and then thrown out of qualifying into the back of the grid. And that's it. Your race is just done at that point. So, like I said, we would have seen a very different race with Lucas up the front. And I think at the bare minimum, he'd have been on the podium because we've seen what Virgin is capable of with that powertrain. Audi should be able to do the same and a bit more.
No, fair enough. And I'm glad I asked the question because it had occurred to me that was an easy way to compare how the manufacturer team was doing versus the customer team. But if the car is not yet to Daniel's liking, then it is not a reasonable comparison to make and good for people to know. But you mentioned Lucas di Grassi, and that really does bring us right to what I promised everyone on Sunday on Missed Apex, which is the chance to complain about all sorts of penalties. And I will just add my personal observations. We all know that Max Verstappen was indeed a guest of the stewards in Marrakesh. But am I crazy to think that somehow it's gone the wrong way around? Rather than them influencing him, it seems like he has influenced the stewards.
They've really come down hard, haven't they? So as we mentioned, Sims was denied his first FE podium, which was to the benefit of Apt, actually, who did get that P3. But after the race, he was given a time-converted drive-through penalty for his incident with Eduardo Mortara at the chicane, where there was the most minuscule contact that sent Mortara round. And Sims was even saying, I don't even think I made contact with the guy. And there was even a BMW protest the penalty, and to no avail, unfortunately. But that was extreme for me. That dropped him down to 7th place. And I think, well, it was probably lighter contact than what we have seen other guys doing and getting away with. And just in this circumstance, he went round probably because of the track conditions that weren't very good, or maybe he just tapped him in the wrong way. There was nothing malicious or idiotic about what Sims did, and therefore it was an extremely harsh penalty. And I just think at some point you've got to say, this isn't, F1 a few years ago where they were just handing out a penalty for everything, it seemed. And these days they seem to be taking a much more lackadaisical approach to driver incidents that I think Formula E needs to do as well. I will draw a line at some point. So the di Grassi incident when he went into the back of Lopez, that was fair game, but Lotterer got nothing for hitting Da Costa, who then ricocheted into Verne and spun him around, contributing to both of their retirements, I might point out as well. And Oliver Rowland got nothing for putting Felipe Massa in the wall, which put him out of the race. So there, I don't see consistency in what the stewards are doing there. So to be fair, I haven't seen the Rowland on board, but it looked fairly malicious and it gave Massa quite a significant bit of damage. So I am not very happy with the way a lot of things were handled this weekend, especially the fact that the vast majority of it happened post-race, in the immediate aftermath of post-race, which I guess is the best scenario you can have for post-race penalties. At least they sorted out who was third before the podium procedure. I've always praised FE for that because I hate it when you get through the podium proceedings and then, oh, actually, no, that guy's had it taken away from him. So at least we get to see the right people celebrating. But I don't think it's a great advert for Formula E.
No, I would agree with you. And the first thing that struck me when you started talking about it was, well, Lauder didn't even get an honorable mention. He didn't even get an under investigation for a much more blatant causing. I mean, he absolutely caused a collision. He caused multiple collisions, and yet somehow his name didn't even get mentioned. Have you heard anything from any of your sources as to how or why this came about? I mean, or do you even know? I mean, in Formula One, I know that they have a pool of stewards that they draw from. They have a driver steward who's there to sort of coach them along in terms of being able to tell the difference when a driver intends to or doesn't intend to do a thing. Not that they always get that right either. But do we know anything? Or were the stewards, was this their first time out? Is it people who have a lot of experience? Or is this coming from higher up? Have they decided that the contact that has been ignored until now is perhaps going to be a dangerous thing and they're trying to crack down on it?
I've often felt Formula E has been harsher than F1 in recent years, despite the fact, and as the chat room points out, um, what is amazing with these cars is that the guys ram into each other in the center of slow corners and the noses stay intact. They're robust. They're well made, those cars. Um, but I've generally felt that FE has been harsher. I think we've just seen more examples of it in this particular race because of the track layout. It was very open to mistakes, like those two hairpins. That is just an incident waiting to happen, isn't it? The first one is so inviting to just lunge up the inside. The second one tightens on the exit as well. The differences in braking as well. People are still trying to work out all their software. All those heavy braking zones. You're bound to see some incidents in there. So I think this race just opened up the opportunity for more incidents, and therefore we saw the wrath of the stewards more than we usually do, because I think usually Formula E races tend to go largely incident free in terms of silly racing and things like that. Like, it's been a while since I've seen somebody just plain run into the back of someone. So I don't think it's anything in the stewarding that was specific for this weekend.
Fair enough. And I think the word you're searching for there is laissez-faire. Is always seemed like to me has been the steward's attitude, which is bumps, knocks. We will let those things go. If you cost somebody some places or you put somebody out of the race, it's going to be a different story. And to me, that's the correct thing. If
But then nothing for Roland and nothing for Lotterer.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you there. It's inconsistent. It's very inconsistent, and it's problematic. But I would much rather see them err on the side of only giving penalties when people are put back places or put out of the race, and let the rest of it just kind of go. I mean, if you spin someone and they lose one place and they get back on, and it was minor contact, there's no body damage, then, well, that's an entirely different sort of a thing than, removing half their body work.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like there should have been something harsher for Roland. Maybe because he crashed out of the race, he got away with it. But for Lotterer, I would have expected something. Sims, I think, was way too harsh, way too extreme, and just isn't right, and not great advert for the championship. And as Max Verstappen would say, they're doing a great job of killing racing. Maybe is an extreme view, but you got to be careful, because you are just going to put drivers off, and that's what Formula One suffered from for a little bit before they just kind of leant back a little bit. I should talk about some post-race penalties that affected the championship, and it was really flip-flopping for a good few hours after the race, because initially after the race, Bird had a 1-point lead in the championship over Jerome D'Ambrosio, the pre-race leader. But then Lopez, who finished ahead of him, was given a penalty. And so that put Jerome D'Ambrosio up into 8th and gave him the championship lead again. But then D'Ambrosio himself got a 5-second time penalty for speeding under the full course yellow, which dropped him back down to 10th. So in summary, Sam Bird has a 2-point lead in the Drivers' Championship at this point.
What's astonishing about that is I watched a full 20 minutes or so of the race after it was over, and I didn't know that until right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's not great, is it?
No, but if you're going to apply the penalties and you're going to investigate them, it's going to be a difficult thing. I do have a question. Did anyone ever actually get a penalty for cutting the chicane? Because I know, like, was it lap 1 or lap 2 that Di Grassi went through instead of going around that little pass-through road that they had there? Several people were under investigation for it, but I don't know of any penalties actually given for it.
I don't think so. I can't remember seeing any off the top of my head. I could be wrong about that. I know there are a couple of guys reprimanded for it in practice, but in the race, I can't quite remember.
Yeah, well, they just said they were under investigation. I never heard the other side of it, but it always seemed to me, well, it seemed to me kind of silly if you're going to put a road there and then penalize people for using it when they get it all wrong and have no other choice to penalize them for it. It's not like they rejoined the track unsafely, as far as I could tell. But anyway, shall we carry on?
Yes, the F1 alumni. This is quite a simple, easy one, actually, because Verline, as we mentioned, P2 in only his second FE race, fantastic. And then Felipe Massa, as we've alluded to, out after incidents with Ollie Rowland and Maxi Gunter. And he had a fair bit to say about that, actually. On eRacing 365, he described Gunther as a typical Formula 3 driver in the way he brakes, which I imagine is something to do with just, I'm going to brake later than you, whether you like it or not, no matter how late you break into this hairpin. And then, of course, understandably a bit miffed with Roland after he was put into the wall. And it's a real shame because he was actually running quite well. He had his first top 10 qualifying, was set for his first points finish of the season, and then it was the rear suspension damage after the contact that put him out. So a bit of a shame. Some bad luck for Massa still. And Van Dorn, as we alluded to earlier, out after the, quote, my own stupid fault incident at turn 3 while he was battling Mortara for 5th place.
Yeah, we are still getting some complaints in the chat room about the presentation of the race. Now, you have been to some races and you've watched some now in the manner of, I guess, most of the fans. What is your opinion of that? There's clearly room for improvement, but do you think it is getting better as they go, or you think there are other things going on behind the scenes that we're not hearing about?
I think every race there's always going to be some issue that crops up, and you really are at the mercy of your location a lot of the time. I am sure that there are people working in the TV compound that are very much going to acknowledge the fact that it's not an ideal setup, because it's largely a lot of tents and not really the kind of thing you don't walk into a TV compound and expect it to be made of tents, really. But that's what you have when you have a traveling circus like Formula E. So I think they're doing the best they can with what they're given, really, and the conditions that they are put in. I think it's always the same for a lot of traveling sports. There's always going to be some issues. But what I see when I go to the races, and the stream I'm providing, is the same as what you guys get at home on the TV as well. It's always the world feed, and so I'll always notice when things don't quite go wrong. So the camera swappings right before the start of the race, that wasn't great. I'm sure there's an explanation for it. I don't have that to hand, unfortunately.
No, that's fair. And I will say that I do love their comms team, Franchitti, Nichols, and Varsha. Just, I don't know. I always enjoy listening to them talk about the race, regardless of whether they have all the right information or not. It's always interesting and informative. But that's just my opinion. So what else do we need to get onto before we get to the end of the show and hand out our awards?
Yes, any other business, my favorite part of the show, as you well know. So, Eduardo Mortara, we just mentioned he was battling for 5th place there. He got an incredible 4th place in the end, which he said was like a victory for Venturi, their first points of the season. And this is what I was kind of alluding to when I said I don't think we've seen the true order of the race here. This was a race of survival, and they did well. And not to take anything away from Venturi, this is an incredible performance that they've put in, and they've turned around the issues that they've had in the first 2 races where they had so many problems with reliability and the braking software and the powertrain in general and energy efficiency in the race as well. If there is a weak point to be had on that car, it was on there. So this result is astonishing and fair play. That was a really, really great drive than that Edo put in there. Robin Fraintz went from 15th to 5th. Great job by him. Jaguar, a little bit sort of anonymous in this race. P6 with Evans, that was the best they could manage, although they knew they weren't going to be quite on the pace in this race. PK was struggling a little bit more in 11th. Oliver Turvey, he crossed the line in 11th, but benefited from all those post-race penalties and is 8th in the final result, which is Neo's first points of the season as well. And Dragon also scored their first points of the season with Jose Maria Lopez, meaning that HWA is now the only team yet to score with Van Dorn's crash, and Gary Paffet ended up a lap down after getting a drive-through penalty for exceeding the power output. Lucas de Grassi, our original pole man, ended up 12th, so not a good day for him. We're still waiting to see the full potential of Audi. Andre Lotterer, so we mentioned, why DS weren't up there in this race. They had overheating issues on Lotterer's car and an inverter issue, which kept him down in 13th place. So he massively had to drop off the pace towards the end of the race. And as we mentioned, there was the Verne contact as well. These guys, when you get bodywork damage, you hinder your own performance so massively because, now we're only down to one car. And the way that the aerodynamics on the new Gen 2 car work is that it's so optimal when it's all intact, but as soon as you throw in a little bit of damage, it just throws everything way off. So you're not only decreasing your own aerodynamic efficiency, but you're also making it harder on the powertrain, and it's harder, therefore, to be efficient and maintain pace. So that's really, really difficult. And when you have a race like this where there are so many incidents, you're going to see a fair few retirements, like what we saw with DaCosta and Verne, both retiring after contact, and they are now with Frantz actually both tied on 28 points, 15 points down on Bird in third through fifth in the championship. Last couple of things. Ollie Rowland crashed out towards the end of the race, as I sort of alluded to earlier. Gunther had a multitude of issues on his car, ultimately retired when he stopped out on track, as did Tom Dillman. He was, I think that was software related that stopped him on lap 1, and he had damage after contact at the start as well.
Wow. Maybe time to take a breath there.
Yes, just one. Go.
Yeah, and Spanners gives me grief for talking too long, is all I would say. No, it was an excellent wrap up, and it was an intriguing race in a lot of ways. And good to see some of the teams that have been in the shadows stepping forward a bit and taking advantage of their opportunities, even if those opportunities showed up mainly through post-race penalties, if nothing else. Can't wait to see Massa get finish a race, really, right?
I would also like to give out a shout out to Maxi Gunter, because he's come across quite negatively in this show with the Massa incident and the fact that he stopped on track. He had a difficult start to the day, stopping on track 3 times in FP1, but actually his qualifying performance was pretty mega. So I just want to give that little shout out in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was getting mentioned at the beginning of the race. He was doing very well. It was impressively well. And then just, the tech kind of went away from him as the race went on, as it will in a series like Formula E. So unless there's anything else, should we possibly head to a podium? Yes, it's that time, sports fans, where we hand out our awards for the E-Prix. And so, Chris Stevens, do tell us, what was your thing of the weekend?
Thing of the weekend, it's got to be Pascal Wehrlein, hasn't it? What a stunning first few races he's had, and I think he's just going to get better with time.
Well, yeah, I can see you making the case for that, and Mahindra in general, to be honest, because they are exceeding my expectations. I expected them to be taking advantage when things went wrong ahead of them, but they put on a proper charge for the front this time round.
But let's see if they can maintain this throughout the season. Of course, that was the weak point of last season. We got to see if they can put up a season-long challenge this time.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it, and I'll give you my thing. My thing is Buemi leading a race.
It's been a long time coming, hasn't it?
And that means, along with that goes Nissan, who we really need to do well, and we want to do well in the series, because if the manufacturers get unhappy with themselves, then it's going to be a much different thing, I think, for the sport than for Formula One. Go ahead.
Well, just to kind of add something to Nissan there, fair play to them because it seems like hardware-wise things are relatively okay. Seems like the big issue they've got is the software. So for them to come in and do kind of this well, it's only their third race, remember. I think they're doing quite well, and I'm glad that we've seen an inkling of their potential now. Whet the appetite a little bit.
Indeed, and as part of that, a special shout out to the mechanics who actually put the car back together that quickly and got it out for FP2, because that is no small achievement. And by the same token, who for you missed the apex?
Pre-race championship contenders in general, because we've just seen a massive swing in the championship. D'Ambrosio only scoring 1 point, nothing for the likes of Verne and DaCosta. Big swing in the championship this time.
Yeah, I like the way you invented a new category of response that covers like 9 different things all at once. That's bordering on clever and disturbs me slightly, I have to admit. I'll tell you, for me, and I hate to say it because it was going so well up until the point, but quite literally, Stoffel Van Dorn missed the apex. HWA had a shot at a top, I would say, 5 or 6 finish, and he just threw it all away. It's a sad thing, but it does happen. And it brings us to our favorite part of the show, that part of the show where we do the segment we intend to before we end the show. And that would be none other than...
Comment of the Week.
So I'm assuming you've kept track, and we have some contenders. We've got a chat room with enough people in it that we're going to have a comment of the week. This is so exciting to me. Anyway.
I have 4 contenders for you.
All right.
Mike Doyle. No spoilers. I haven't watched the race yet.
That was almost me. Go ahead.
Paul Wright, when we realized what we should have called the show, he said, nah, it should have been called England Win on Penalties.
Fair enough.
Which would have been even funnier if Bird, because remember Bird, it flashed up, didn't it, under investigation for being underweight and cleared like 10 minutes later. Brett Cook has got 2 nominations here. Verline did amazing. I just can't get over that moustache.
It is a bit 70s filmish, yes.
Do you know what is also 70s? His choice in trousers as well. He was wearing like these red striped ones in Marrakesh, and I wanted to ask him, where did you get those? They are so funky fresh. His other one is Chris is dancing like a pirate to the podium music.
Ooh, so this is hard. We have to choose between mocking you and making fun of other people. I don't know. It's hard to say. Do you have a winner for us?
I am going to go with Paul Wright. It should have been called England Win on Penalties.
All right, well done. You can add that to your Twitter bio. Paul Wright, congratulations for winning this week's
Comment of the Week.
And so that brings us to the time for all of the plugging. What are you here, and where can we find you, Chris Stevens?
You can find all my written work and all my podcasting appearances over at ejournoonline.com. Follow me on Twitter. Not at the usual place. I have changed my Twitter handle. It is now at Chris on Racing.
No more score. Chris, no more scores, Stevens. Chris on Racing Stevens. On Racing Point, on Force India Racing Point. I don't know. I'm getting very confused by all of these changes. My old brain simply cannot cope. As for me, I'm at MattPT55. You can find me on the Twitters and shout at me there. I will definitely respond to you, assuming I'm still conscious. And do look out. My wife has released a new book, the wonderful, talented, and fabulous at A Weaver Writes on Twitter. So you can go look for that and use it as distraction for when you want the big screen telly all to yourself. And remember, chicks dig heels, wounds cause scar, and glory is a fungible concept under certain philosophical precepts. This has been E-Radio Show.